On August, a wall of water roared through the town of Silver Creek, drowning all in its path. What happened next shocked the entire nation. It was late August of 2005, and the small town of Silver Creek sat quietly along the banks of the Willow River. Summers here were usually lazy and calm, fishing on the docks, children chasing fireflies, and families gathering for weekend picnics by the water. But this year, the weather had been different. Heavy rains upstream had swollen the river for weeks. Locals noticed the water creeping higher each day, but no one imagined how quickly it could turn deadly. At 11:30 p.m. on August, a torrent of water slammed into Silver Creek, causing catastrophic damage to homes and businesses along the riverfront. Cars were swept away, trees were uprooted, and countless animals perished in the flood. But even in the face of such devastation, the spirit of the community remained unbroken. In the aftermath of the flood, residents of Silver Creek came together to help each other rebuild their lives. They salvaged what they could from their waterlogged homes, shared food and supplies with those who had lost everything, and comforted one another in their time of need. The outpouring of support from neighboring towns and communities was equally heartwarming, with volunteers and aid workers rushing to Silver Creek to offer their assistance. But as the days turned into weeks and the waters receded, a new set of challenges emerged. Many of the homes in Silver Creek were uninhabitable. Farms were destroyed, businesses were ruined, and the town's infrastructure was in tatters. The flood had not only taken lives and livelihoods, but it had also left scars that would take years to heal. Despite these challenges, the people of Silver Creek refused to give up. They rolled up their sleeves and got to work cleaning up the mess and rebuilding their town. With the help of federal grants and the unwavering support of their neighbors, they managed to piece together the shattered remnants of their community. Today, Silver Creek stands as a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. The scars of the flood may never fully fade, but the bonds forged in the face of adversity are a source of pride for the town's residents. They have turned a tragedy into an opportunity to create an even stronger, more resilient community, and that's why, on the evening of August 29th, a powerful thunderstorm swept across the region. Rain hammered the rooftops, lightning split the sky, and winds rattled the windows. For most residents, it was just another summer storm. But for Sarah Thompson, a 32-year-old nurse and single mother, it would become the fight of her life. She lived in a small, one-story house with her 8-year-old son, Daniel. As the storm raged, Sarah tucked him into bed, whispering, "Don't worry, sweetheart. It'll pass." At 1 a.m., she was jolted awake by a strange sound, rushing water. The river had broken its banks and water was already seeping under the doors. Adrenaline surged through Sarah's veins as she realized the extent of the danger. With the river rising at a terrifying rate, she knew that if they stayed in that house, they would be swept away in the raging torrent. Acting swiftly, she grabbed Daniel's hand and raced to the attic, their only escape from the rising water. With each step, the sound of the rushing water grew louder, more menacing. The once playful murmur had transformed into a roaring beast threatening to devour everything in its path. As they climbed the rickety attic stairs, Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs, echoing the frantic rhythm of her steps. The attic was small and cramped, but it offered them a temporary reprieve from the rising waters. With the rain still pouring and the wind howling outside, Sarah and Daniel huddled together in the darkness, waiting for the storm to pass. But as the minutes ticked by, the water continued to rise, inching closer to their sanctuary. Sarah knew they couldn't stay there forever. When the water level reached its peak, it was time to make a decision. With a deep breath, Sarah emerged from the attic carrying Daniel in her arms. The sight that greeted them was both surreal and terrifying. The river had risen dramatically, transforming the landscape around them. Trees that had stood tall were now submerged, their branches reaching out like the arms of drowned giants. The rushing water had turned into a deafening roar, a relentless force of nature determined to claim everything in its path. As Sarah navigated through the debris-filled water, she held onto Daniel tightly, shielding his face with her body, hoping to protect him from the worst of the storm. Every step was a battle against the current, every breath a struggle against the howling wind. But amidst the chaos, Sarah's determination burned bright. She refused to give in to fear or despair. Instead, she focused on her son, his small hand clutching at her shirt, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration for his mother. Together, they pressed on to figures battling against the fury of the storm. Within minutes, the calm home had turned into a nightmare. Furniture floated by, cupboards creaked, and the current grew stronger by the second. Sarah woke up suddenly. She could feel the vibrations in her bones. "Daniel, wake up!" she screamed over the roar of the water. "The river's flooding. We have to go." She scrambled out of bed and waded into the waist-deep water. Her son Daniel was still fast asleep. She reached for him, but the water was rising fast and the bed was floating away. She grabbed Daniel from his bed. His eyes were wide with fear. "Mommy, what's happening?" he cried. "The river's flooding," she said firmly. "We have to get to higher ground." She hugged him close, shielding his face with her body as she struggled to wade through the water. The house was filling up fast. She could hear the water lapping at the floorboards. She needed to get out, but the front door wouldn't open. The current pressed hard against it, forcing her to turn around. She kicked open a back window and pushed Daniel through first, then climbed out after him. They were in the water up to their waists now. The window shattered above them, and more water poured in, making the escape impossible. She had to make a choice. Stay in the house or leave with her son. She didn't want to leave him, but there was no other option. She pushed him toward the tree. "Go!" she screamed over the roar of the water. "I love you," she yelled, hoping he understood. But the current was too strong. It was pulling him away from her, and she couldn't hold on any longer. She pushed him again, hoping he would grab the tree. "Go!" she screamed. She watched as he disappeared into the darkness, praying that he would be okay. Then she turned and fled, knowing that she couldn't save them both. Flash floods are no joke. They can happen anytime, anywhere. And when they do, they can be deadly. Our next story is from Jakarta in Indonesia. A woman was trying to evacuate her neighborhood. It was a street in an old part of the city. Their homes were built on a low-lying area. So, whenever there was heavy rain, they would flood. But this time it was worse. The woman's name is Sarah. She was trying to get to higher ground with her 2-year-old son Daniel. The entire street looked like a river. Cars were submerged, tree branches swept past, and the current tugged at her legs like invisible hands. Holding Daniel tightly, she began moving toward a neighbor's two-story house. Each step was a battle. The water rose to her chest, then to her shoulders. Debris banged against her, garbage cans, fence posts, even a broken bicycle. The strong current made it hard for her to keep her footing. Suddenly she lost her balance. The current ripped Daniel from her arms. "No!" she screamed, diving forward. In the faint glow of a street light, she saw him clinging to a floating piece of wood. Summoning all her strength, she lunged and grabbed him, pulling him back against her. His small arms locked around her neck, and she turned her head to look for help. Luckily, a man saw them. He was standing on the second floor of his house. He quickly jumped into the water. Other neighbors also joined in. They managed to pull the mother and son out of the rushing water. They were shivering, scared but safe. This is not the first time we've told you about flash floods in Indonesia. In January this year, at least 24 people died in a flash flood in the Indonesian capital. Homes were destroyed, roads were washed away. It looked like a war zone, and this was just one of the many such incidents that happened in the city. You see, Jakarta is prone to flooding, and climate change is making things worse. There's more rainfall, more evaporation, more water vapor in the air. All of this increases the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events like floods and droughts. Indonesia is ranked among the top 3 countries most affected by extreme weather. Getting to safer places is a big challenge for many residents. This is where better urban planning comes in. Can Indonesia's cities withstand extreme weather? Here's what experts say needs to be done. 1. Tackle the root cause, which is climate change. Countries across the world have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. 2. Improve urban planning. This includes better land use, rainwater harvesting, green open spaces, and of course, stronger buildings. 3. Raise public awareness. People must be educated about the risks of climate change and how to prepare for extreme weather events. And 4. Better disaster response. Evacuation plans, early warning systems, and rescue operations need to be improved. Indonesia has started taking some of these steps. In 2021, it launched the national movement to prevent flood and landslides. States across the country are working on spatial planning. They're also improving drainage systems and building more reservoirs. But clearly it is not enough because the threat posed by flash floods and other extreme weather events continues to grow. Indonesia has thousands of islands, beautiful beaches, lush rainforests, iconic landmarks. It's a major tourist destination. But for all its natural beauty, the country faces some serious challenges like extreme weather, poverty, inequality. Can Indonesia overcome these challenges and build a better future for itself? We'll keep watching. The water was rising fast. By now, escape through the street was impossible. It was too strong. Sarah spotted the roof of her own house. From this angle, it looked like an island in the raging sea. The water was nearly reaching it. With no other option, Sarah carried her 2-year-old son, Daniel, up the side of the house and onto the roof. She had never been so scared in her life. The rain was pounding down on her, mixing with the dirt and debris that was swirling around them. She could feel the wind snatching at her clothes, trying to pull her off her feet. On the ground floor, the water was lapping at the door, pushing at it, trying to force their way in. Sarah crawled further up onto the roof, pulling Daniel with her. She had to get him out of this weather. She couldn't protect him forever. Just when she thought it couldn't get any worse, the wind seemed to rise, taking the rain to a new level. Huge drops, like icy needles, pricked at her skin. The wind roared in her ears, drowning out all other sound. Sarah's heart broke at the sound of his terrified voice. She pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. "Someone will come for us, I promise." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure if she believed them. No one could possibly reach them in this weather. They were completely cut off. She looked around frantically, searching for something, anything that could help them. Her gaze fell on a small patch of dry land on the other side of the roof. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Maybe if she could get Daniel over there, they could huddle together. It would be a little bit of shelter from the wind. As she stood up, she felt something crack under her foot. She looked down to see a broken tile. Water was pouring in through the hole in the roof. Quickly, she moved to cover it with her body, shielding Daniel with all her might. The wind tore at her, testing her strength. Every fiber of her being was focused on keeping herself and her son alive. Minutes ticked by. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The water kept rising, inching closer and closer to where they were. If it reached them, it would sweep them away. Sarah knew that. She thought of her husband, Mark. He would be out searching for her, looking for her. She hoped he would stay safe. If he could just get to her, then maybe they could face this together. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones. She could feel the wind stealing her breath away, but through it all, she held on. She held on for herself, for Daniel, for Mark, for their love, for their family, for their life. The world was a whirlwind of rain and wind and water. As long as he was alive, she would keep fighting, keep holding on, praying that somehow, some way, they would make it through this. The storm had been their worst nightmare. Winds had howled, rain had poured, thunder had boomed, lightning had flashed, all through the long, terrifying night. Now, as the first pale fingers of dawn crept over the horizon, Sarah stood on the roof of their house, her eyes searching the endless gray expanse that had swallowed the sun. She turned to go back inside when a small movement caught her eye. It was Daniel. He had woken up. His eyes were wide and scared, his body shaking violently. Wrapped him in her jacket, holding him close. She crooned an old lullaby her mother used to sing when Sarah was little, a song about a little lamb who lost its way and found comfort in the arms of a kindly shepherd. The melody was ancient, its tune as old as time, and yet it brought comfort to her brother, quieting his sobs and slowing his shaking. From where she was, Sarah could see other families on their own roofs. Some huddled together like sheep, others pacing restlessly, all of them waving their flashlights and calling out for help. Their desperate cries were swallowed by the wind, their hopes and dreams dashed against the unrelenting grayness of the sky. The water was still rising, swirling with debris and threatening to engulf their world. Sarah knew they couldn't stay on the roof any longer. They needed to get to higher ground. But as she turned to leave, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Daniel was gone. In the few moments she'd been distracted, he had slipped out of her grasp and was now sitting on the edge of the roof, his eyes wide with terror, his gaze fixed on the raging waters below. "Daniel," she cried, her voice hoarse with fear. "Don't move," she said, her heart pounding in her chest. She scrambled closer, her hands outstretched, willing him to stay still. "Please, please don't move." With a strength born of desperation, she reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm just as a rogue wave struck the house, shaking it to its foundations and sending a fresh torrent of water cascading down the roof. Sarah lost her footing and fell, tumbling over and over in a dizzying, terrifying fall. She closed her eyes tight, bracing for impact, but it never came. Instead, she felt a searing pain in her leg, and then everything went black. When Sarah woke up, she was lying on the cold concrete floor, her leg throbbing and a strange, salty taste in her mouth. She tried to sit up, but a searing pain shot through her leg, forcing her to lie back down. She looked around. She was in a small, dark room, the walls slick with moisture. A faint light filtered in from a crack in the wall, illuminating a pair of worried faces peering at her from the darkness. "Sarah, you're awake," her mom whispered, rushing to her side. "Oh, thank God," she cried, her voice trembling. Her dad was behind her, his face etched with concern. "How's your leg?" he asked, his voice gruff with emotion. Sarah tried to answer, but all that came out was a weak whimper. They had managed to find an abandoned grocery store a few blocks away and had been rationing the supplies ever since. Sarah knew they couldn't stay there, not with the water rising, and who knows what else the storm might bring. But with her injured leg, where could they go? Who would take care of her? The thought of being a burden, of slowing her family down in this desperate race for survival, filled her with dread. The days that followed were a blur. Sarah's leg grew worse, the pain a constant, throbbing reminder of her uselessness. She watched, helpless, as the water rose higher and higher, swallowing the houses, the streets, the world. The storm had cut them off from everything. There was no way in or out. One evening, as the sky rumbled ominously and the rain poured down in sheets, Sarah knew the worst was yet to come. The dam had broken. The water was rising fast, faster than they could have ever imagined. In just a few hours, it had climbed to the second story of their home. Their only escape was a rickety old roof, and now the rain wasn't letting up. Sarah cradled her 5-year-old son Daniel close, shielding him with her body as best she could. Around them, the neighborhood was underwater, the streets transformed into raging rivers. Cars were abandoned mid-journey, some floating past their home like discarded toys. Sarah's husband, Mark, had gone out to scout for higher ground, but so far no luck. Their phones were dead and the storm showed no signs of stopping. This was their new reality now. Then, around 10 o'clock in the morning, the distant hum of an engine broke the silence. Sarah turned her head, and through the torrents of rain, she saw it. A rescue boat. She waved her arms frantically, shouting, "Over here!" Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drum solo of terror. She thrashed in the water, trying to reach the surface again. But the current was relentless, dragging her under once more. She screamed, a primal, desperate sound that echoed the turmoil in her heart. Visions of her son's frightened face flashed before her eyes. Was this the end? Would she never get to see Daniel or Mark again? Just when hope seemed to be drowning beneath the relentless current, hands grabbed her, strong hands that pulled her up towards the surface. Gasping, coughing, she was lifted into the boat. One of the firefighters cradled her, his face etched with concern. She looked over and saw Daniel being handed to the other firefighter. He was crying, tears streaming down his face. "Mommy, I thought you were gone," he cried, his small voice choked with sobs. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice hoarse from fear and the struggle. She held him tight, burying her face in his soft hair. His little body trembled against hers, and she felt a sob rise in her own throat. She understood his fear, mirrored it in her own heart. She stroked his back, murmuring soothing words she didn't even hear herself say. The firefighter who had rescued her waded into the shallow water up to his chest, helping her out of the boat. Still holding Daniel, she stumbled onto the solid ground, the muddy water sucking at her feet. She hugged the firefighter, tears finally spilling down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." He patted her back awkwardly, a faint smile touching his lips. "It was our pleasure, ma'am." "You and your son were very brave." He gestured to her son, who had stopped crying but was still shaking. Mark rushed over, his face ashen with worrying. "Sarah, are you okay?" Relief flooded his eyes as he saw Daniel in her arms. "Oh, God," he whispered, pulling them both into a tight embrace. As the rain continued to pour, Sarah clung to her family, feeling the warmth of their love envelop her like a protective shield. They were safe now, for the moment, and that was all that mattered. The ordeal had shaken them to their core, but it had also revealed the strength, courage, and love that resided within them. And they knew that as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm. When you're outside, be careful of falling trees. When you're inside, be careful of flying glass. In May 2013, a powerful tornado ripped through the small town of Silver Creek, Oklahoma, just east of the Texas border. The storm caught many residents by surprise. Meteorologists had predicted heavy rain and high winds, but not a tornado, and it wasn't until the last minute that people realized how dangerous the situation was. One resident recalled, "It was one of those freak storms. We didn't think much of it at first, but then all of a sudden, boom, it hit." Sarah and her young son Daniel were visiting her parents who lived on the outskirts of town. As the tornado approached, they took shelter in the basement of her parents' house. But as the wind and rain intensified, the basement began to flood. With rising water, they knew they had to leave. So they went upstairs just as the tornado touched down. Debris from the house began to fly through the air. Her parents shielded their heads with their bodies as they huddled together on the floor. Then the house collapsed. Outside, the powerful winds and heavy rains continued to lash against them. Huddled on that roof, they had only one goal: to survive. Sarah later told reporters, "That night taught me how strong we can be when we have no choice. I wasn't just fighting the river, I was fighting for my son's future." At some point during the ordeal, she began to sing songs to calm Daniel, who was crying and scared. She sang "You Are My Sunshine" and other tunes as she rocked him and told him how much she loved him. She didn't know if they would make it, but she wanted to give her son a sense of security. Meanwhile, the storm raged on. The water kept rising, eventually reaching the top of the roof. Now, with nowhere else to go, Sarah, her parents, and Daniel spent 16 long hours on that roof, holding onto each other for support. Eventually, the floodwaters began to recede. By the time the sun came up, the water was gone, and so was the tornado. But in its wake, it left behind a trail of destruction. The small town of Silver Creek was in ruins. Mud caked the streets and houses were destroyed. Dozens of families lost everything, and some never returned to Silver Creek, but Sarah and Daniel survived. They were rescued by firefighters and taken to a local hospital. They had cuts, bruises, and were suffering from exhaustion, but they were alive. In the days that followed, they stayed with relatives as they tried to rebuild their lives. Now an adult, Daniel often thinks back to that terrifying night. But rather than being consumed with fear, he remembers the courage of his mother. He recalls how she kept singing to him even though she was scared. And he remembers how she never gave up hope, even when it seemed like they had no chance of survival. Daniel's story is one of hope and resilience in the face of adversity. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can prevail. So what's the moral of this story? Well, it is not so much about morals as it is about appreciating the strength and resilience of the human spirit. This story is a testament to the power of love and the will to survive. Sarah's actions in that moment, her bravery, her quick thinking, and her determination to protect her son are truly admirable. It's also a story of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can be a guiding light. The story shows us that even when all seems lost, we should never give up. With courage, determination, and a little bit of hope, we can overcome any obstacle. If you enjoyed this story, stay tuned for more. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching. Until next time. It was a night much like tonight, dark and filled with rain. But 1 year ago, the Silver Creek River rose, overflowing its banks and turning the town into a scene from a nightmare. Homes were swept away, lives were lost, the town was never the same. But there was one little girl who survived. She was only 5 years old. And when the water started to rise that night, she knew she had to do something. So she climbed onto the roof of her house and stayed there all night, all alone, until dawn. When the sun came up, she was found and a police officer walked over and asked her, "Where are your parents?" And she looked at him and said, "I don't know." Then he asked, "What's your name?" "I'm not sure," she said. "I can't remember." And then the officer noticed that her teddy bear had been swept away in the flood. He picked it up and asked her, "Do you remember this bear?" And she looked at him and she started crying. And the officer felt his heart break because he realized that this little girl had been through something she would never forget. And as she cried, she told the officer about her teddy bear. She said, "I had a brown bear, but the water took my bear." And then the officer did something incredible. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. And he told her, "You don't have a teddy bear now, but you'll always have this." And she looked up at him and she stopped crying. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. You see, that little girl didn't just survive the flood, she survived without losing her spirit. And now, 1 year later, her story is a reminder for everyone who knew her that no matter how bad things get, we can always find a way to be brave. We can always find a reason to keep going. Hi, everyone. This here is Officer Ben Tyler. He's the one who found the little girl on the roof. And he's also the one who gave her his jacket. And today, exactly 1 year later, he came back to Silver Creek to see how she was doing. So we went to the little girl's house. Her name is Isabella, Bella for short. And her parents were so happy to let us come inside. They wanted to show us what Bella had become. See, after the flood, everyone thought Bella would need therapy. Everyone thought she would have nightmares, that she would be afraid of the water, that she would never be the same. But her parents knew better. They could see that Bella was a fighter. From the time she was born, Bella had a heart of a warrior. When she was just a baby, she had to spend several weeks in the hospital. She had pneumonia and her parents were told to prepare for the worst. But Bella didn't want to go, not her, not then. She fought for every breath, every heartbeat, and she won. And now, 1 year later, she was winning again. She still had moments where she would wake up screaming, "The water's rising, the water's rising," but those moments were fewer and farther between. And instead of giving into her fear, her parents encouraged her to take charge. Whenever Bella felt the anxiety coming on, they'd ask her what she wanted to do, what she wanted to talk about, because they knew that fear couldn't survive when there was joy in the room. So we asked Bella if she remembered the night the river rose, if she remembered the fear. And she looked at us and she said, "All I remember is that I was scared, but then I wasn't scared anymore because the sun came up and that made me feel safe." Then Officer Tyler spoke up and he said, "Well, Bella, it's a new day, a brand new day. And as long as you have that jacket, you'll always be safe." And Bella looked down at her teddy jacket and she smiled. She was only 5 years old, but she understood that sometimes life could be scary, that sometimes we would face challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. But she also knew that with a little help, with a little love, we can overcome anything.